Hello, everybody. This is Taylor Thomas Smythe. I am an author, designer, and creative, and today I'm going to give you a little crash course that I gave to a class recently at my alma mater. This is a little crash course on creativity, my writing process, and a brief overview of self-publishing. So strap in. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Taylor Thomas Smythe. I am a Florida boy, born and raised. I am a graphic designer by trade, and in my spare time, I'm a creative writer, songwriter, filmmaker. Specifically, I write novels and other works of fiction, and some of those books have won awards. At the time of this course, I have released 10 novels into the world, which still feels crazy. Those span two different series that are both in the fantasy and sci-fi kind of realm. My first series is called Kingdom of Florida. It is an award-winning middle-grade fantasy fiction series, and it spans 7 novels, and maybe some spin-offs and other things to come. We'll see. Stay tuned. And then my most recent series is called Magic City Wonders, and it is a 1980s set sci-fi action-adventure story. The books really feel like, I don't know, think of your favorite 80s adventure movie, and it's that kind of vibe. Really fun and lighthearted, but still has some depth and emotion to it that makes it really compelling. And I have a 4th book coming out in that series, hopefully later this year. I'm so close to finishing the manuscript for that, and I'm really excited about it. If you're interested in finding any of those books, just visit lamplight.universe.com, and I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. The class I originally gave this talk in was called Writing About Florida, so I wanted to speak a little bit about how and why I started writing about Florida, because you may have noticed from the last slide that all 10 of my novels have some connection to Florida. I originally started writing about Florida when I was out of state for grad school. I lived in Indiana at the time, and I actually just started getting homesick and really missed Florida, so I started creating artwork and designs that were tropical and inspired by my hometown of West Palm Beach. And that eventually led, when I moved back to Florida, to writing about Florida. And I had this idea. One of my professors in college, actually the professor whose class I got to speak in with this talk, he coined a phrase, the Kingdom of Florida, and he sort of meant the sort of wild, natural, untamed Florida, kind of almost was this kingdom-like thing. But when I heard that phrase, I got this idea for a fantasy-inspired world, and so that kind of birthed the idea for Kingdom of Florida, my novel series, which is about a group of children who find this magical parallel world that exists between the cracks of our own, and it kind of has sort of a Chronicles of Narnia feel to it with a Florida tropical twist. During the class in which I gave this talk, I challenged the class to take 1 minute and write out as many ideas for a story as they could think of. I challenged them to try to get to at least 10 in 1 minute. So if you want to do that, take a moment and you can pause this video for a minute and write down a list of ideas for a story. It can be anything at all. So go, pause the video now. Okay, if you did the challenge, the next step in the process was I asked the class for an idea of a person, place, or thing, and they shouted out different ideas. So we picked an idea, and so I had them do the exact same challenge that you just did, but this time I had them write 10 ideas, or as many ideas as they could think of, but involving this one thing. So if you want to do this challenge again, take a moment, pick something. You could pick Florida, or you could pick someone in your life, or a place that you like, or ice cream, or anything at all. So think of something, pause this video, and take 1 minute and generate as many ideas as you can. And go. Okay, and we're back. The thing that I wanted to illustrate with this is that it actually, when we did this in class, the class came up with more interesting and exciting ideas when they were limited to writing ideas about this one specific thing, rather than when you start with this idea of think of ideas in general. It's kind of just so massive and nebulous that it's hard to know where to begin. So I've found that it actually has increased my creativity to limit myself to writing about Florida. And now I may eventually write about novels about something that's not about Florida. But for now, I've chosen to make that really my identity as an author. And that's actually spurred on some really interesting and creative ideas that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And I'm really excited to bring some of those ideas to life, even beyond the 2 series that I have currently released. But the general idea that I wanted to illustrate was that limitation breeds creativity. Limiting yourself and giving yourself parameters actually creates guardrails within which you can be even more creative, rather than this sort of nebulous place where you don't know where to start. Has anyone ever thought about your art, this isn't very good? Because I certainly have. I think this about my art all the time, and it can often be paralyzing to think that, okay, I just will never put art out into the world because it's never going to be good. I was kind of in this boat for a while where I just sort of wallow in that, and maybe you've been in that place too. But I want to encourage you with another video and talk from a person named Ira Glass, and he gave this wonderful talk that's one of the most inspiring things to me creatively. I come back to it all the time. There's a wonderful animated video that goes along with this little excerpt of his talk by a guy named Daniel Sachs. Since this is someone else's video, I'm not going to copy that whole video into this video, but I do encourage you to go watch it. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. Please watch it, bookmark it, save it, share it with all your friends. It really changed my outlook on creativity as a whole, and I hope it will for you. Since I'm not going to play the video in this video, I did want to just tell you what it's about, and the main idea of that is this idea that there is a gap between the taste of what we think of as an idea, that something that is good and that we like and it meets our expectations, and the place that we are now, where we're not creating art that really measures up to that standard that we have for ourselves. And what Ira Glass says is that the only way to fill that gap is by just creating more work. Continue to create things, set goals for yourself, set deadlines so that you finish one story every week, was an example he uses in that video. He says it's only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And one of the other things I love about this video, it says this is normal, and the most important thing you can do is a lot of work. And some people might be thinking now, this is kind of crazy. Basically the idea he's saying is quantity leads to quality through proficiency and confidence in your voice. And some people may scoff at this, and this doesn't mean that every single thing you create has to be shared with the world, or that creating a lot of stuff is going to automatically make amazing stuff. But it's this idea that we're all really familiar with, where we say practice makes perfect, which I don't think that's true, but practice makes proficient, and practice makes progress, makes you better. You can't really get better unless you practice at something. That's the whole reason we do practice. And so it's the same thing with creativity. You have to practice it. You're exercising that creativity muscle. And I have learned that, this through trial and error, this is an amazing way to get better at creativity. And sometimes you're going to share this art with other people, and that's going to continue to build confidence because you're going to get feedback from other people. I've had the privilege of creating artwork that gets to be shared and experienced by people. Many years ago, I wrote like a short musical, and when I was in college, I was on a sketch comedy show creative team, and so I got to write scripts and act in scripts and produce things. And with that, you get real-time feedback as those things are being performed by getting an audience reaction. They're laughing, they're crying. They didn't really cry much in the things I created, but they were comedic. But you get the idea. I was getting real-time feedback. Same thing with stories. When I release a novel, I love to see a review show up on Amazon or something, and someone explains what they liked about the book, or how engaged they were with the story. So these are all great ways to get feedback, and those things all continue to build confidence in your voice. But you only get to that point by creating a lot of work. So that would be my encouragement to you. Create a lot. What this looks like for me is that I set specific times throughout my week and my regular rhythms where I am creating things. In this current season of life, I've been writing novels. So what this looks like for me is that I set aside time each week and certain days of the week and times of day where I will work on my novels, and I will just sit and write as much as I can in that day, in that time slot. And this is how you get something done. I also have had different rhythms throughout the last decade or so of my life where when I was in grad school, Sunday afternoons, I would come home from church and I would write a song and record it on a voice memo. But I'd write a whole song and then that would just be it. I'd write it in one day and I wouldn't really think about it. And some of those songs were really amazing. Some of those songs were not that great. But you only get to those really great songs by sifting through, the weeds of having the quantity of all these songs to look at and be able to pick out the good ones. So those are just some examples of how I've created a lot. I encourage you to do the same. If you're a visual artist, maybe that's setting a goal for yourself, every day or every week. You just do some sort of little doodle. There's really great challenges that happen like Inktober, or for writers, there's NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, where there's other people. Maybe if you need that kind of accountability of that other people are doing it or they're going to show your work, these are great ways to engage with that. A quote I really love from Henry Matisse is, "Creativity takes courage." And you really do have to be courageous enough to put yourself out there and put your artwork out there and put your vulnerable self out there to be a creative. And this is a process. I think in some ways it can get less scary after you've done it a lot, but I guess also sometimes the stakes keep raising, so that can be new levels of courage that are needed. But I think this whole process is worth it, and it's better to be creative and courageous than sit around with ideas in your head that you never execute because you're scared. Take that first step and just write or release one little short story or poem or something and get feedback on it. Or don't get feedback, just put it out there and move on to the next thing so you can continue to build that creative muscle. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about my writing process, and contrary to this title screen, no, it does not involve a typewriter. I also want to just make a disclaimer that this is my personal writing process. This is not prescriptive. This is not what you have to do if you want to be a writer. I'm just going to share things that have been helpful to me and share my process, and maybe that will give you some inspiration about how to find the best process for you. So my writing process always begins with sort of some combination of outlining and marinating on an idea. I actually keep a note on my phone, and I have various Google Docs where if an idea pops into my head, I will write it down. If I think it has any potential at all to be a story or a movie script or a comedy sketch or a song, I will just write that down. Even if it's one line, if it's like a title for something or like a random concept. I think after creating so much, I've become able to realize when an idea has potential, and I always write those down. So in the case of my writing process for a story or a series, I will start outlining and marinating. My marinating process sometimes looks like a Pinterest board. For Kingdom of Florida, I have literally, I think, thousands of pins on different like subboards, for some for characters, some for locations, some for just like things that I think would look cool, or some different visuals of how I imagine certain areas of this magical world looking, or what creatures might look like. And this is really helpful for me to just put things out there. This was also really helpful for that series because I had an illustrator who was drawing pictures for different moments in my book, and I wanted to be able to tell her and show her, here's kind of the vibe or the feel that I'm thinking these things look like. Obviously, she could use her imagination to embellish that, but this was a helpful way for me to take things that were in my head and put them into a way that she could understand them. Outlining, I use Google Docs for this. This is really helpful for me. More recently, I've gotten into using more of like a screenplay story structure format, like plot structure, to map out my stories. This is really helpful. It kind of becomes almost like a fill in the blank, which some people might, again, scoff at that and think, oh, that's not creative at all. But the types of stories I write are very like cinematic and kind of have the pace of like a movie. So this is a really helpful way for me to pace out the story and make sure it flows the way I want it to. You don't have to follow that exactly, but that's kind of been a good starting point for me, and then I'll embellish it from there. But I sort of try to fill out the main beats so I understand the arc of the story and the plot and what journey the characters are going to go on, internally and externally, before I even start writing any words of a chapter, just at that whole process. I also take time to map out a lot of details about the characters, which I'll go into in a minute. And another part of my process that's very important is discipline and consistency. Like I was saying earlier, I set aside time on specific days of the week where I will write. Mornings for me are a great time to write. I kind of do my morning routine and then move into writing, and I try to, just give myself an uninterrupted hour or two and write as much as I can, which sometimes is not much at all. But sometimes I write like a whole page or something, and eventually that becomes a book. Other important parts of my process are resting and editing. I learned early on, my first book, I didn't take like any days off, and I felt so burnt out. So after that, I've always made a point of practicing Sabbath, of resting on Sundays or certain days of the week, so that I know that I'm not going to be creating or producing anything on those days, and that helps me feel really refreshed for when I do come back to my story. And then lastly, editing is a really important part of the process. I like to take space away after I've finished my manuscript of, if I can, several months, so that when I come back to it, I'm looking at it with fresh eyes, almost as if I'm reading something that someone else wrote, and I'm able to pick up on things that I may not have caught if I was to just like go immediately into it after finishing the first draft, So giving that space is a really helpful part of my process. I mentioned that I take some time to map out my characters. I kind of have these different questions or angles that I like to think about my characters from, and I don't do all of these for every book or every story, but maybe these are helpful ways for you if you're stuck on how to flesh out your characters. Again, there's so many wonderful resources out there on YouTube or other places where you can learn more about this. But I think the basics are like physical descriptors. So this is, what color hair, what color eyes did this character have? What's their name? How old are they? What's their age? Those sorts of things that are really important details about what the character looks like, how I visualize them. And then I also, in parentheses, you see here page references or chapter references. I always make a note of, I mark out what chapter or page that descriptor was first used in the manuscript. So if in the first chapter I mention that the character has blonde hair and blue eyes, then I'm going to say like chapter 1, this book title, in my Google Doc, so that I know I can come back to that. And I also, that lets me know like, oh, I actually said this in the manuscript, so I can't contradict it elsewhere or, accidentally say they have a different color eyes or something. That's really helpful for me, especially when I'm writing a series. There's so many characters, so many books, and so many things to keep track of, and I can't keep it all just in my head. I will forget things because there's way too many characters to think about. I also write like connections they have to other characters. So, this is such and such parent, or this is like a sibling of this person. I make sure those things are noted in that. And sometimes I'll also write like details about how they fit into the story overall, if I'm sort of mapping it out at the beginning before I've started writing the story. So other things I like to ask about are, how do they reflect the theme? What's this character's motivation? What is their core fear? What's their core flaw? And what's sort of the emotional arc or journey they're going to go on? Some of these later ones kind of have almost like a psychological angle to them, and it can be really helpful to think through your character's maybe personality type. Maybe think about what Enneagram type they might be, or Myers-Briggs. Those kind of things might help you understand like what place your character is operating from, and that way you can write dialogue and action that makes sense and feels consistent throughout your story for that character. So that's just a little bit about my writing process, and I wanted to also just end this section by saying something that I have to tell myself a lot, which is that all progress is good progress. It can be very discouraging to be staring at a blank page and feel like you're not really making much progress, or that you only added a couple lines to the story that on a certain day. I have to remind myself that progress is good. Even if I'm just on my morning that I set aside to write, that I don't actually write any words, but I spent time thinking about the story and where it's going to go next, that is progress. I needed to go through that process to be able to write the next part of the story. And a story or a novel does not write itself. It happens in little increments. And I think I often put an unrealistic expectation on myself that it's just going to happen overnight, like some sort of magic thing. But it really does happen in small increments over a long period of time. And so that's why I would just encourage you and remind you that all progress is good progress, because it's moving you closer to that goal. I also wanted to say you can't edit nothing. I'll explain it, and it makes sense, I promise. What I mean by this is don't get so hung up on making your story and every sentence sound perfect on your first draft. You will be able to come back and edit, but you can't edit nothing. So you have to start somewhere so that there is something to edit. And tell myself, just get the thing out there, out of your brain, onto the page so that you can then edit it and organize it. But if it's just up in your head, you can never get to that point of editing it and making it sound good at all. So just take that first step and get the thing out of your head, of your brain, of your imagination. And then later you can worry about making it sound perfect or excellent. Not perfect. Nothing's perfect, but the best that it can be. So that's just an encouragement. You can't edit nothing. And then on that note, I would encourage you to just start, which, as we all know, is not Nike's actual slogan, by the way, but I just thought it sounded funny to put that with the Nike logo. This is the part that can be sometimes the most daunting, and it can be the hardest part, is just starting writing the story. I always take time to marinate and outline my ideas, but don't paralyze yourself or get stuck in that place forever. At some point, when you feel like you have enough of a guide of the direction you're headed, just start writing, and then you can always edit later. Okay, in this next section, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of self-publishing and how that process works for me. This is a not very deep dive. There are so many wonderful resources out there for you to find online, and hopefully this will give you just a good starting point of what you might want to search for or think about. I chose this route of self-publishing because I knew I'd have complete control over the design and the style and the release date and the distribution, all of that. As a graphic designer, I had a really specific vision of what I wanted the book to feel like and look like. And so this was a really great option for me. I also started writing and releasing books in a time when I didn't really have the emotional bandwidth to go through the querying process of finding an agent and submitting manuscripts to be published by a traditional publisher. I did that at one point. I think I queried an agent or two and got rejections. Just was not what they were looking for. But to me, I really wanted to just get these stories out into the world, and I didn't really want to waste time with that process. Again, I would love to be traditionally published. I think there's like some validation that comes with that I would love to have. But I also have found ways, that doesn't mean my books are any less just because I self-published them or, was indie publisher. But anyway, you may want to go a traditional route if all of these, all of the details and design and marketing and that's like not your cup of tea, then traditional publishing may be the way you want to go so that you don't have to think about all these other details. But for me, who's someone's very creative and entrepreneurial, I get excited about being able to think about all of the different elements of this. So what are the main options when it comes to self-publishing? And with self-publishing, I'm specifically talking about print on demand for the most part, or digital ebooks and stuff like that. The big three from my perspective are Amazon KDP, that stands for Kindle Direct Publishing, Ingram Spark, and Lulu.com. Lulu.com for me is not really on the same level as the other two at all, but it's great if you're trying to publish something that's maybe just personal, like you want to just print a copy of a book that feels like a real published thing, but you're not going to like sell it widely. You can do like one-off things without them having to be widespread. But the other two are if you actually want to get your book out there, if you want to have it on Amazon and different book selling websites, these other two options are great. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail other than to say that basically I use Amazon KDP for my paperback and ebook versions of my books, and Ingram Spark I use for hardcover editions of my books and to be able to do pre-orders with those. And that's like hardcover with dust jacket, really nice quality. And then I also will do ebook through them as well. In self-publishing, I'm in charge of the marketing and design of my books. I love creating fun like social media content and reels and graphics and things like that. So I'm in charge of all this. The part that I really want to learn more about and know there's like money to be made in it if I were to master it is learning how to use marketing ads on Amazon and Google. And there's so many, ways to do that are somewhat cost effective. Again, I think at this point, it seems like the market is really oversaturated. So it can be really tricky to like find your place and your niche. But again, if you're excited about this thing, there's a lot to learn there and a lot to, practice through trial and error. When it comes to design, I mentioned earlier that I am a graphic designer by trade. That's my day job. So I am well versed in how to set up a file for print and, knowing how to plan for bleed and fold lines and all of that fun stuff. If that's not your cup of tea, you may want to enlist help when it comes to this part, but I get excited about creating the cover design and then also designing the interior of my book. Some people think, like maybe don't even think about the interior of a book being designed intentionally, but for me, that's a really important part of the book feeling readable, is picking good fonts, having like nice margins and spacing so that a book, it's just easy to read and it feels very professional and clean and high quality. So those are all important parts of design. Something you might also want to think about if you're self-publishing is awards. For me, this has been a really helpful part of adding to the credibility of my work, is having people that I don't know that are like third-party awards organizations choose my book out of tons, hundreds, thousands of books to receive an award or to be a finalist in an award. That is incredible, incredible honor. So the only thing I would say about this, again, there's so many different awards organizations out there. I would say find your niche and try to be as specific as possible. That increases your chances of winning an award. So I wouldn't submit my Kingdom of Florida first book for just like general best book ever award, because I know that it's not that, and I won't have any chance of winning against other novels. But I did submit it and choose to submit it for categories that made more sense for it, like best regional Southeast fiction, because it's about, that region of the world, or fantasy or like children's fantasy categories. So find the niche, be as specific as you can and accurate as you can to what category your book falls into, and that will increase your chances of winning awards. Also know that awards, it costs money to enter all of these, and some of them there's prize money if you win them. Others it's just recognition. I have found ways to try to maximize this. I put when I win an award, like that is now going to be on my website, and that sometimes will be on the cover of my books, and that's like a great way to just like give credibility to your book in a way that's very validating, in my opinion. Some other elements to think about for self-publishing are website. You should have a website for your author, like you as an author. So I have ttsmythe.com, which actually goes to my publishing house, lamplightuniverse.com, just because that's kind of the bigger umbrella. It's all kind of they all sort of integrate with each other. But have a place on the internet where people know they can find you and find all of your works. And that way you can direct people to the links to buy them off these different sites. Lastly is money. And all I'll really say about this is there is a lot of money to be had in self-publishing if you know what you're doing. I have not made a lot of money in this, if I'm being honest. That's just like me being transparent about this process. And other people, though, have made like hundreds of thousands of dollars off of their books because they know how to do ads well, and they have, other ways of getting the word out that I just, again, as a full-time employee of a day job, like I just have not had the time and energy to devote to that. But there's so much, so much information about that online that you can find to try to do that well. Almost everyone judges a book by its cover, so make it a good one. I'm not saying that my covers are the best ever, but that is a really important part of your book overall and the experience of your book. One of the great things about self-publishing is that if you released your book with a cover and you realize a few years later that you don't like it, or that it's not selling, or catching people's eye as well, you can always update it and change the files, and future versions of when someone places a future order of your book, it will be printed with the new covers. So that's a great thing that I've taken advantage of. So that's a great feature, in my opinion, of self-publishing, is the flexibility to change as trends change. Hopefully all this has been helpful to you, or some of it at least, but I wanted to leave you with just a few challenges. My challenges to you are to, 1, set deadlines for yourself. Find a time or space in which you can create. For me, that is, I will set a deadline of when I want to release a book, and I've learned kind of a realistic timeline of how long it takes me to write a book at this point in my life. So that's able to help give good accountability and kind of a boost. for me. But of course, show grace to yourself. If you can't meet a deadline, it's not the end of the world, and it's better to create a good book than force something out there that's not ready to be out. And the next thing is to create limitations for your stories. For me, that's looked like choosing to write about Florida or somehow connect my stories all to Florida in some way. And so that doesn't have to be what you do for your story, but if you're stuck, I would say think of a limitation. Say, I'm only going to write stories that involve 3 characters, and then think about this is an example, and see what interesting concepts come out of that. Next, make lots of art to close the gap, as we noted in the Ira Glass video. Just create a lot of things. For me, I like to write songs on the weekends just as a fun habit, and eventually hopefully I'll release some of those into the world, but and some of them are not good and some of them are really good. But I only got to the really good ones by creating a lot of work to be able to look back and see which ones were actually good. So just as an example, but create lots of work. If you are a poet or like to write short stories, just commit to writing a new story every week. Or if you're write a poem every day that's just short, and just observe something in your world and write about it. And that will help you get better at writing. And even better, kind of a bonus to that, is create lots of art and then share it with someone to get feedback. And that also will help you improve your art. And my last challenge to you is just start. Start somewhere. Start logging ideas, start outlining a story, start writing the first chapter, whatever you need to do to start. I just encourage you to do that. Hopefully take this as a gentle nudge to begin your next creative project. Okay, everyone, I hope this was helpful. Like I said, this was based on a talk I gave to a class, and at this point I opened the floor for questions and we had a great discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments and I will do my best to reply. I'm pretty active on my YouTube comments, so would love to answer any questions you have, or maybe you'll give me ideas for a future video if it's something that needs more explanation. You can connect with me on Instagram at Taylor Smythe. You can also follow my publishing house at Lamplight Universe. You can find all my books at either ttsmythe.com or lamplightuniverse.com. They both go to the same place, so take your pick. Yeah, I would love to hear from you. I hope you have a wonderful day and get inspired to create something beautiful today. All right, see you guys next time.